this MDC Alliance press conference, which will be addressed by Honorable Vice President Tendai Biti.
All right.
He's going to address it, and so I'll hand over proceedings to him straight away. I'm going to ask all journalists, please, if you can observe social distancing, and if you can please ensure that your mask is worn correctly. Thank you. VP.
Thank you very much, Fadzi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Fourth Estate. We are pleased to welcome you here to our press conference as MDC Alliance. It is common cause that the country is on the edge. The country is at a crossroads arising out of a deep structural crisis of leadership. The truth of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, is that Mr. Mnangagwa has failed in absolute terms. So we see a manifestation and a reproduction of multiple crises. There is a social crisis. There is a political crisis. There is an economic crisis. There is a humanitarian crisis. There is a human rights crisis arising out of the closure of political space and the suspension of the constitution. There is a health crisis, a multifaceted health crisis, underpinned by COVID-19. But long before COVID-19, our public health system had collapsed. All these crises, in our respective view, as MDC Alliance, emanate from the unresolved election crisis and legitimacy crisis of 31 July 2018. Zimbabwe is therefore paying a price. Zimbabwe is therefore carrying a burden of the unresolved legitimate question in Zimbabwe. We are concerned particularly about three things that are characterizing the regime of Mr. Mnangagwa. We are concerned about a culture of impunity, a situation where the regime and its apparatchik can carry out moves and policies oblivious to the law, oblivious to the constitution of Zimbabwe. And I'll give examples later on. So there is impunity. And the twin cousin of impunity is entitlement. We are grossly concerned with the culture of entitlement that is pervading our country. And later on I'll speak about corruption, the huge amounts of corruption that are arresting our country. We are concerned about the huge extraction levels in our country, the levels of state capture. Every institution in our country, without exception, from the executive, the legislature, all institutions are captured in our country. And I will talk about that in a while. We're concerned about the lack of leadership. What we have seen in our country is a situation where the regime remains oblivious. The regime remains indifferent to the suffering of our people. As I'm talking to you right now, inflation is now exceeding 1,400%, which is the second highest in the world after crisis hit Venezuela. And for us in the MDC Alliance, it is unacceptable that we can find ourselves in another bout of hyperinflation pursuant to the meltdown years of 2004 to 2008. As I'm talking to you right now, there's massive wage erosion due to de-dollarization, due to the demonetization of the regime of multiple currencies. Workers' salaries have collapsed in some instances by more than 100%. Where an average civil servant used to earn US $500 is now earning effectively less than $10 US. There's a crisis with monetary policy and the mismanagement of the local currency. Only yesterday, the official auction rate was 1:77. The black market rate is trading at 1:110. You can't plan, you can't organize your business in a situation of a volatile currency crisis and a distorted exchange rate. We're concerned about the closure of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange without due process, without any respect to the rights of members of that stock exchange. And it's not just the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange that has been closed. Also social markets, the indiscriminate moves taken against the informal economy when 95% of Zimbabweans are unemployed and 95% of Zimbabweans are located in the informal economy. So we call for the unconditional reopening of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. We stand opposed to the indiscriminate treatment of the old mutual PPC and SIDCO. The constitution must be upheld. The rules of the law must be respected. Company law must be respected. The Securities and Exchange Act must be respected, and therefore the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange must be reopened, and reopened unconditionally. We're also concerned about the attacks on Econet. Every individual in Zimbabwe has rights, including corporate bodies. There are property rights codified and protected by Section 72 and Section 73 of Zimbabwe. So you don't wake up and close and withdraw licenses. That is unconstitutional. We're also concerned with the disrespect of the right to dignity and the right to privacy codified in our constitution. We object very strongly the attempt by the state to extract data and privacy data from Econet. We find that unacceptable. I want to move to the social crisis. We are deeply concerned with the crisis in our health sector, a situation where frontline workers, in particular nurses and doctors and other staff, have essentially withdrawn their labor given the abuse arising out of failure to pay adequate wages to doctors. We call upon the authorities to urgently address this very simple issue. Pay doctors, pay nurses in an adequate salary expressed in multiple currency. There must also be provision of personal protective equipment, which is missing at the present moment in these hospitals. Not just that, it's also the absence of drugs in these hospital institutions. I will address COVID separately. We're also concerned with the humanitarian crisis in our country, where 7 million Zimbabweans are food fragile and where 7 million Zimbabweans need assistance. Unlike others, we call upon the international community to intervene in Zimbabwe, not through the government, but directly through organizations that have worked traditionally with our people. The government must be avoided and obviated so that support goes to our people. And we've got so many organizations that have worked with our people over the years, including the World Food Program, including the Red Crosses of this world, and various NGOs that have worked with our people. It's important to preserve life. It's important to protect a livelihood. So we invite the international community. We thank them for what they've been doing lately, the huge amounts of money that have been paid through the European Union, through the United States of America, which remains the country's biggest donor, through DFID, through the Canadian CIDA, the Swedish CIDA, and various other international organizations. We thank them for what they're doing, but we want them to accelerate their support to vulnerable Zimbabweans, vulnerable communities. We are concerned about the crisis of governance in our country. That crisis of governance is reflected in a number of key issues that I'm going to talk about. The first one is corruption. We estimate as MDC Alliance that out of every dollar that is being paid by the tax, by a taxpayer in Zimbabwe, 60 cents are failing to reach the taxman. 60 cents is being stolen from every dollar that is being paid to the taxman. So corruption is putting a huge premium on the country's development. When there are no drugs in hospitals, it is because of corruption. When the civil servant is not being paid adequately his wage, it is because of corruption. We have seen this corruption in different forms across the length and the breadth of our country. The number one form of corruption has, of course, been the abuse of the US dollar and foreign currency perpetrated and implemented through the Reserve Bank. And it is our view that the Reserve Bank must forthwith abandon export surrender requirements, which are in any event not supported by law. Secondly, any allocation of foreign currency must be left to the market, must be left to Parliament, because Parliament allocates all monies in the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So the Reserve Bank must be removed in the value chain of foreign currency in this country, because it has become a reservoir, a huge trough of leaking and arbitrage. Number two is command agriculture. As we keep on saying, 2.7 billion US dollars was stolen directly through Treasury in 2017. 3.5 billion US dollars was stolen directly through Treasury in 2018. We are eagerly awaiting the 2019 audit report. And ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you that the 2.7 billion of 2017 and the 3.5 billion dollars of 2018 will pale into insignificance because of what they did in 2019. Some of the deals which we know, for instance, who financed the acquisition of Zimaloys, the acquisition of BNC, the acquisition of a private bank, we have no doubt those were done through Treasury. So the gap from corruption in 2019 is going to be bigger than both 2017 and 2018. We are concerned with procurement. We have seen the massive disrespect of the procurement laws, particularly in health, where little companies who don't even have physical addresses have extracted huge amounts of money from Treasury, with little fish, little people being prosecuted. And where they've been prosecuted, it has been a catch and release. So massive corruption is taking place through public procurement, a situation where the country's procurement laws, as I have said, is not being respected. We note, for instance, the massive corruptions in all the parastatals. We have just gone through the audit report of 2019 of ZESA. It's a shocking report where millions and millions of dollars were allocated and distributed without respect to the laws, without respect to good corporate governance. We've just gone through the report of Zinara, where again millions and millions of US dollars were stolen without respect to the laws, without respect to the country's procurement laws. We've gone through the report of NASA, again a shocking saga of corruption. So the conclusion we make as MDC Alliance is that the bulk are nothing but feeding troughs for the elite in ZANU-PF. And needless to say, that puts a premium, a development premium on the country's capacity. On human rights, we are concerned, seriously concerned, by the continuous abductions of colleagues. As we are sitting here this afternoon, we are receiving reports of massive abductions that are taking place throughout the country. There is a colleague who has been abducted, or colleagues that have been abducted in Chireds, in Bulawayo, across the length and breadth of our country. We're concerned about the attack on the general membership of our movement and general citizens. We are concerned in particular at the concerted effort to liquidate the MDC alliance. We take great exception to the description of our alliance as a terrorist organization by an individual, a ramshackle individual, unqualified to make that statement in the form of Patrick Chinamasa. We are a legitimate constitutional organization that many years ago in 19 the bold decision to achieve democratic change in Zimbabwe through peaceful, democratic, constitutional means. Despite ZANU-PF's seduction, despite ZANU-PF's temptation, we have refused and resisted the common formula on the African continent of going into hills and calling yourself a rebel movement. We have remained loyal. We have remained loyal to the principle of peaceful, constitutional, democratic change. If anything, it is ZANU-PF itself which is a terrorist organization. It is a terrorist organization that abducts people. And if you have any doubt about that, talk to Mrs. Itai Zamara right now. She doesn't know where her husband is. Talk to Mrs. Patrick Namabanya right now. She doesn't know where her husband is. Talk to Joanna Mamombe. Talk to Netsai Maroa. Talk to Cecilia Chimbiri, and they'll provide you with evidence, B11, of the brutality and the terrorist nature of ZANU-PF. Talk to the family of Herbert Chitepo. Talk to the family of Jasiah Magama Tongogara. Talk to the family of General Mujuru. They will bear witness to how terrorist an organization ZANU-PF is. Talk to other members of our party right now that are being hounded left, right, and center as if they are common criminals. Where is Job Scala right now? Where is Gift Ostalos Ziba right now? Where is Obey Stole right now? Where is Makomborero Aruzivishe right now? They are all in hiding, being hounded by a predatory, thugocratic state led and presided over by one Emerson Mnangagwa. So I want to emphasize that we will remain loyal and to the value of peaceful transformation of our country, which is why in March of last year, we launched a document called Reload. And the epicenter of that document called Reload is dialogue with a regime that we don't like, but we understand ultimately that any crisis will have to be resolved at the table. So notwithstanding our total dislike of ZANU-PF, we recognize the imperative of dialogue. And we've made it very clear that this country needs to resolve the crisis of legitimacy. This country needs structural reforms that are both political, economic, socio-economic, to restore the social contract, to restore trust and confidence in the state. And most importantly, this country needs a transitional mechanism, a national transitional authority that will oversee the process of reform until the country is ready for the next election. So we remain loyal to that document, Reload, despite the changed circumstances, despite the increased temperature, we still remain loyal to the values and obligations of peaceful constitutional transformation of our country. Which brings me to 31 July 2020. We support the right of the citizens who have organized 31 July 2020. We support their constitutional right to embark in a peaceful constitutional protest against the regime codified in Section 59 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. We reject the fascist response by the regime, in particular the remarks made by the deranged Patrick Anthony Chinamasa. A responsible government would have asked for dialogue with the organizers of the events of 31 July 2020. But this regime is unique. This regime is violent. This regime is impervious to logic, to objectivity. And we've seen a serious clampdown on citizens. We object to the arrest of Wepo Chingono. We object to the weaponization and instrumentalization of the profession of journalism. Journalism are a medium of transmission of a message. So you deal with the message, you don't deal with the conveyor, you don't deal with the vector, you don't deal with the agent who is making that communication. So we demand the immediate release of Wepo Chingono. We demand the immediate release of Jacob Ngaribvumo. Jacob Ngaribvumo is again a conveyor of the suffering masses out there. He has not committed any crime. He has not thrown a stone at anyone. And anyone who has watched these videos, it's clear that he is calling for a peaceful program on the 31st of July 2020. So we object to ZANU's attempt to convert the 31st of July 2020 into another 1st of August 2018. We object ZANU's attempt to convert 31 July 2020 into another 1st of August 2018. We don't want bloodshed. We don't want bloodshed. We want the Constitution to be upheld. We want the Constitution to be respected. I now want to finish on COVID. As a movement, we are greatly concerned with the regime's mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I will highlight its omissions. The first omission has been the regime's failure to conduct adequate testing for our people. Rapid tests, RCPs, don't work, and in many countries they actually use for mere research, those 5 minutes test. This government has failed to effect a rollout of proper diagnostic tests. Number two, the regime has failed to isolate, to track, and to quarantine victims of COVID-19. That failure has been reflected now in the massive growth, exponential, of the number of persons and the number of individuals who are now infected by local transmission. So we have seen the numbers rise from a modest 6 to now more than 2,000. We place responsibility, we place culpability purely and strictly on the doors of the regime, on the doors of Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. So what is now happening is that the combination of COVID, the combination of a very cold winter, the combination of a hungry population that doesn't have jobs, that doesn't have food, you have seen the emergence in Zimbabwe of a slow genocide. The death rates, the mortality rates have just shot up. And anyone who lives close to a funeral, a yard like Greendale, like Mbudzi, like Warren Park, like Glen Forest, you would have seen the massive increases. Mavuku, Tafara Cemetery, you would have seen the massive increase in the number of people that are now being buried. So we have a deep crisis right now. In Bulawayo, both UBS, Mpilo Hospital, they are full. At Paringatwa, they're not taking any admissions. At Harare Hospital, they're not taking any admissions. So COVID is real, and we have got a national crisis that has already exacerbated the fragile and vulnerable health system that we have had. We do not think that this government has got capacity to deal with this disease. They don't have capacity to deal with this disease. And once again, we call upon the international community, in particular the UN family, in particular DFID, the European Union and others, to actually come in directly and provide the missing capacity in our health sector. We have no doubt as MDC Alliance that there's going to be a disaster. Left on our own, left on its own, Zimbabwe is going to implode from a COVID point of view. There are going to be so many deaths. And the thing about this disease, it doesn't care whether you are a minister or a clerk or a bus driver. It knows no class, it knows no race. So we as MDC Alliance fear pandemonium, and we ask for international intervention because Mr. Mnangagwa has failed and failed in absolute terms. And it's a leadership question. Why has he failed to appoint a substantive minister of health ever since firing Obadiah the full mole? Why has he failed to appoint a substantive permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health? In other countries, they appoint a professional COVID task force led by a competent person, not a vice president who thinks that the reason why we have got an economic crisis is because white people didn't teach us how to run an economy. So there must be a professional COVID task force that is driven and pushed by data, not conjecture or anecdotes. To deal with the COVID curve, you need data, and we don't have data. Fourth, we condemn the government for failing to provide social safety nets to Zimbabweans. Every other country, South Africa has done very well in terms of provision of grants to its people. We don't necessarily agree with them in borrowing, but at least they've done and shown leadership in providing social grants to their people. In Zimbabwe, there are no social safety nets. And we asked this regime, they read out an $18 billion package to give social safety nets of at least US $50 per household per week until the COVID pandemic is over. We also asked that they should release a package, a business package to SMEs and business, because it's not just enough to flatten the health curve. The economic curve must also be flattened. But ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the biggest challenge we face in Zimbabwe is not COVID, the disease, is not the economic crisis, it's actually the political pandemic. It's actually COVID, the politics. And that is the graph that needs to be flattened. That is the curve that needs to be flattened. And as the biggest political party in our country, we've got big responsibility on our shoulders. And the big responsibility on our shoulders is that we are calling for soberness. And we are ready and willing to provide the leadership, the necessary leadership that our country deserves and deserves desperately. We are calling for the immediate cessation by this state of all hostilities against the individuals. The abuse of human rights in every quarter of our lives. I mentioned the abuse to property rights, the abuse to human rights, the right to privacy, the right to dignity. We are calling for the restoration of the Constitution as a matter of urgency. COVID has allowed this regime through the back door to impose a de facto state of emergency. So everyone's rights have been transcended and abused and suspended. So we're calling immediately for the restoration of the Constitution and constitutionalism in Zimbabwe. And finally, we're calling for intervention from the region. President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his capacity as chair of SADC, in his capacity as chair of the African Union, must know that there's a crisis in this country. The crisis needs external refereeing. It's urgent that we must attend to serious, deep structural reforms in this country, as we argued in Reload. It's urgent that there is a political solution as a matter of urgency. Without that, there will be an implosion. Without that, blood will be shed on the streets. So, as the biggest political party in Zimbabwe, we're calling for leadership, and we're ready and willing to provide that leadership. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable E.T. We will now take questions. Yes? I'm just going to ask you to raise your voice because it's remarked.
Honorable E.T., Madame Coupe says you are infringing your party's rights by using the name MDC Alliance. What's your response to that?
I will not be drawn to answer to things that are clearly fictitious. On the 31st of July 2018, there was a political party called the MDC Alliance, led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa, that participated in that election. On that same day, there was another political party called the MDCT, led by Thokozani Coupe. She absolutely knows nothing about intellectual property, and I suggest that she keeps her mouth shut.
Thank you. Yes? Mindy from Technic. Yep.
I just wanted to find out, are you calling for the members of the MDC Alliance Party to come out on the 31st of July?
As I said, I've been very clear. We support the right of citizens, Zimbabweans, to organize peacefully and constitutionally and democratically by Section 59 of the Constitution. So we support what will happen on the 31st of July 2020.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No further questions from members of the media? Yes, Rumi, you've got a follow-up?
Just a follow-up.
Yes.
Do you think people will actually come out saying that most of the members of the leadership of the MDC are on the wanted list that was recently released by the ZRP?
Look, the MDC Alliance did not organize this event, but we support the rights of the compatriots who have organized that.
All right. Are there any other questions from any other members of the media?
It's very rare that journalists
It's very rare.
are tongue-tied.
Oh, are our faces scaring you today? Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much for